Hello, and welcome to another edition of U.S.-Japan Council's Japanese American and Japan Legacies series. I'm Deborah Nakatomi. Diane Fukami and I are your hosts for this series, highlighting the lives and journeys of prominent Japanese American leaders, each of them pioneers in developing the U.S.-Japan relationship. Through their stories, we explore the role of Japanese Americans in strengthening U.S.-Japan relations and how their experiences with Japan have contributed to their Japanese American identity and our community. We'd like to thank the U.S.-Japan Council for providing this opportunity to share these unique and powerful stories. We would also like to thank our friends at Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs for their invaluable support of this program and of Japanese American leaders to nurture the U.S.-Japan relationship. Today, we are pleased to have Alan Okamoto, owner of Tea Okamoto in San Francisco, former USJC board member. Welcome, Alan.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and a privilege. Thank you.
Well, it's great to see you. So let's start by having you tell us about your parents and some of your early memories of them, because they had such an impact on your life and influence in who you are.
Well, they certainly did. Both my parents were very community-minded. My father was the founder of the Japanese Cultural and Community Center way back in the early, I don't know, Diane, maybe you might know the year, but it's been, 35 years approximately. My mother was very community-minded. That's a picture of my father way back. We had our office on Fillmore Street in the Western Addition of San Francisco. My mother was very active in the community with all the PTA activities and the Cub Scouts with me. And she was a founder of the Hamilton Senior Center in San Francisco. And she did that for maybe 40 years or so. Every Wednesday, she would go to the Hamilton Senior Center, regardless of weather or vacations or anything. She religiously went. And it was made up of a lot of Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans, and African Americans, because we were in the Fillmore District area. So I think I got a lot of my volunteer impetus from both my parents.
Now, your parents are both Nisei, right? And so they were born and raised in this country, correct?
My mother was born in Alameda, and she is a Nisei. My father was born in San Francisco, but as most other young men, he was sent to Japan to be educated through high school. And then when he completed high school in Japan, he returned to San Francisco. And although he finished high school in Japan, they made him go back to Lowell High School for one more year. And from there, he went to UC Berkeley and received his degree there.
Wow, that's pretty impressive at that point, going to UC Berkeley.
I think so. There's a lot of interesting stories that he told me about his experiences at Berkeley. They belonged to the International Club, of which Tomoe Takahashi of Takahashi Trading Company was a member. And my father told me this interesting story that they went on a double date with somebody else. And this was like, 70 years after it happened. And Tomoe Takahashi remembered what my father had for lunch and what he was wearing. And she complimented him on his manner.
Well, that's a woman who had a remarkable memory for sure. So your parents were married before the war. Tell us what happened. What happened to them when all the Japanese Americans were removed from the West Coast?
Well, unfortunately, due to Executive Order 9066, they were sent to the Tan Fran racetrack. And my parents had a 3-year-old daughter, maybe 2 years old. And their son was, my brother, was just 3 years old, I believe, 3 months old. And they were put into horse stalls at Tan Fran racetrack. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I wasn't born yet, so I didn't experience that. But as I said, because my father was a UC grad and completely bilingual, he was selected to be an instructor at the U.S. Navy Language School in Boulder, Colorado. And that's where I was born, in Boulder.
And so many San Franciscans ended up from Tanforan going to Topaz relocation or a concentration camp in Utah. And because of your father's language skills, you guys avoided having that incarceration experience in Utah then?
That is correct. Although, unfortunately, all my uncles, aunts, and grandparents were incarcerated in Topaz.
So when did your family return to San Francisco or the West Coast?
Well, as soon as the war was over, the Japanese Americans returned. Well, some returned to the West Coast. My father returned to San Francisco, and he started his business, and he called it Okamoto and Sons, although I was only a year and a half old, and my brother was only 3 years old. He started his business in insurance, and a lot of the Japanese Americans were very concerned and very insecure, so they wanted to buy life insurance. So my father did very well. And then after the Japanese got resettled years later, they needed housing. So my father got his real estate license, and he had a long career as a realtor in San Francisco.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges he faced being a realtor in San Francisco post-war?
Well, he never really told me his personal experiences about the discrimination and the fight for equality. But I do know that in the early 1950s, he applied for membership with the San Francisco Association of Realtors, and he was denied membership solely on the basis of his ethnicity. And I know that because several of the board members at that time told me that story. But what was really remarkable is that some 45 years later, 50 years later, I was elected president of the San Francisco Association of Realtors. And at my installation, I was giving my installation speech, and I told that story. And I looked down at my father, who was in the audience. And I rarely get emotional when I speak. But believe me, when I saw the look on my father's face, I could hardly breathe. I had a lump in my throat. I could hardly speak. And to top that story, in 1991, the San Francisco Association of Realtors gave my father lifetime membership in the association. So that was a wonderful story.
That's a great story, Alan. And it seems that your father had a vision for both the company and your involvement in the business by naming, I didn't know the part about and Sons. So from the very beginning, he knew that you were going to be a part of that business. It's a great story.
Well, he knew, but I didn't know.
So we want to have a little bit of fun here. We've heard, Diane probably knows this, that basketball has played a really important role in your life. It's a passion for you. And we've got some great photos here. We haven't talked very much about your childhood and about your younger days, but clearly we look at this picture and we wonder, are you the guy in the front row with no shirt on? Or are you one of the guys in the back? So which one are you?
I had to be the one in the back with the Adidas t-shirt on.
Okay, with your arm up. Okay,
right.
So this looks like what? Like a high school picture?
I
Just
think
a bunch of buddies?
It might have been post-college, really. I'm not
really?
sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
Post-college, great. Well, tell us about basketball. This is a really fun one too. We can't believe that people wear shorts that short, actually. But tell us about basketball, because basketball has been really prominent in your life as a young person, as a father, and you were telling us even later on, and really enabling young people to travel to Japan. So why basketball, and how is it that it captured your imagination in the way that it did?
Well, I absolutely loved to play basketball. That's a funny picture there. That was on a 9.5-foot basket. It was not on a 10-foot basket. So I really never had that kind of leaping ability.
Oh, but you know what, Alan, that just speaks to your integrity. Nobody would ever know that Mr. Honesty here has to let us know that it was 6 inches short.
But anyway, it was a great stress reliever for me. I tell you, I probably had a giant ulcer or a heart attack if I didn't have basketball to take out my stress and aggressions on. But both my son and my daughter went through the Japanese basketball leagues with the Enchantés and Ardennettes, and my son was with the Associates. And we used to spend all of our weekends going to basketball tournaments all over California. We would even take 3 or 4 trips to LA to participate in all the various tournaments down there. So it was really great family activity. And to brag a little bit, my daughter became so good in high school that she became all Metro, which means all Bay Area first team. So at 5'1" and 90 pounds, she did a good job.
Yeah, but it took you a long time to give up the ball, though. Oh, look, you're still holding it, and you've got the gray hair going, which is very impressive. I mean, you're really active.
Well, like I said, I love basketball. I was never any good, but I really loved it. The camaraderie and the exercise was really good. This is a picture of the San Francisco old timers, and believe me, we were old timers. My daughter used to call us slow motion basketball, because we used to move around so slowly, but it was a lot of fun, and I made a lot of lifetime friends.
Now, turning to something a little more serious, you didn't go very far from home. I mean, you went to school, was it at SF State?
That's correct.
And then tell us a little bit about the career decisions that you made in SF State and afterwards.
Well, I majored in real estate and finance at San Francisco State, and for what reason, I'm not really sure, but I graduated, and then my father approached me and asked me what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I told him, like any 20-year-old kid, you don't know what the heck you want to do. So he said, why don't you just get your license and come to my office and work until you find out what you want to do for the rest of your life. So now, some 50-something years later, I still don't know what I want to do with the rest of my life, but I guess I really enjoyed my real estate career.
We have a wonderful picture of you and your dad, and I believe that you're standing out. You're standing at the Japanese Cultural Community Center of Northern California.
That is correct. We're standing in front of the donor wall at the community center. My father was actually the founding president of the center, and the founder of the center. He envisioned a Nisei center way back 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And it evolved into the Japanese Culture and Community Center, which services the entire Japanese community, not just the Issei. But it was really built by the Nisei population in San Francisco. And hopefully the Sansei and Yonsei generations and Gosei generations will continue the legacy.
Your dad and your family were real community leaders. I mean, your dad had something to do with co-founding the Japanese Chamber of Commerce of Northern California too. What do you know about that?
Well, that was probably when I was just a real young kid. But we have pictures of him forming the San Francisco JCL, the Northern California Chamber of Commerce. And of course, as I said, the Japanese Culture and Community Center. So he was a real pioneer in establishing a lot of the institutions in San Francisco for the Japanese Americans.
We want to explore your family community involvement, because I feel, getting to know your history and your father's history, that it speaks so much about the legacy of the generation before us that really made commitments and lived their values. And the way that you've spoken about your father and also your mother, there are a lot of lessons here about modeling behavior and being community minded. And as children watching parents, you can't help but learn. So talk a bit about your mother. I recall, especially, you were talking to us about what her life was like and how community was so much a center of that life.
I think that her entire life obviously revolved around the family, but secondarily, it was the community. She was the president of the PTA. Every PTA of every school that I belonged to. She was the president of the Satsuki Kai. She was president of the Urasenke Tea Group. She was president of the Ikebana flower arranging group. She was a person before her time, because a lot of Japanese women at that time didn't aspire for leadership roles, but she really did a good job in working with the community. She was a real asset to my father. My father did a lot of the work, and my mom did a lot of the community PR work.
This looks like a picture where she's standing in somebody's classroom. Do you know where this is?
This picture was taken at the Hamilton Senior Center. They're setting it up for the meeting of all the seniors.
And that was another one of...
You told us a little bit about your mom being so dedicated to the Hamilton Senior Center. You know, for people who don't live in San Francisco, talk about how significant that was, and also about the volunteer award that's given every year in your mom's memory.
Well, the Hamilton Center was designed to service the seniors in the community, not just Japanese American, but all ethnicities, and Caucasians and Blacks, Chinese. But my mom used to go every Wednesday without a failure. As a matter of fact, we used to schedule our family vacations around that Wednesday. She had to go because she really wanted to help the seniors in the community. And she was, as I said, she was a leader in a lot of community activities. And many years ago, the Japanese Culture and Community Center established the Kei Okamoto Community Volunteer Award, which is given to a volunteer in the community who contributes. And there's been a lot of very, very significant volunteers who receive that award over the years.
Well, she clearly had influence on your siblings as well. We have a great picture of the three of you also, because I know that they too are also really active in community.
They are, and they may be more active than I am. My brother was a city councilman for Foster City. He was president of the JCL, San Francisco, I believe. He worked with National JCL and with the San Mateo Buddhist Church. So he was very active. My sister moved to Hawaii, got married, and she was a state assembly person for 36 years, I believe. She was the second longest serving assembly person in Hawaii. And she also contributed to a lot of the community activities in Hawaii.
Well, we definitely want to delve into some of your community activities, because you have successfully managed to have kind of this dual career of community and business, but we know that your business passion is real estate. And you continue to be as active and working as vigorously as ever over all these decades. So tell us about your work and tell us what drives that passion that you have for real estate and leadership in the real estate field.
Well, as far as real estate is concerned, when I first started, we were in the Western Addition, and that had a lot of Victorian homes. And I just fell in love with the Victorians. They were so beautiful and classic. So I thought I would become the Victorian specialist in San Francisco. But then I soon realized that the Japanese Americans don't like Victorians. They thought they were too old, too decrepit, hard to maintain. Plus, they started moving out when the community was destroyed by the renovation of the community in 1960s by the redevelopment agency. The Japanese Americans moved to the Richmond district, the Sunset district, and a lot of them moved outside of the Bay Area. So I had to readjust my goals, and I started selling in the 5 Bay Area communities, homes, condos, small apartment buildings. So I really enjoyed being a realtor. As they say, if you love what you're doing, you never work a day in your life.
A lot of that comes from your dad, though. And, you know, one of the things you told us were the values that your parents passed on to you. You know, Alan, I've known you for a real long time, and I was still surprised when you told us that you have never been sued in your whole career as being a realtor. It's not surprising to me that you haven't been sued. What's surprising to me is that was the truth, because people are so litigious nowadays. But for all the time that I've known you, more than 30 years now, You've been known as a man of integrity, honesty, and very well respected. Tell us a little bit about those values that your dad especially imbued in you.
Actually, that is very true. I am what I am because of my father, Okage-sama de. My father was probably the most honest, respected, trustworthy person that I've ever met. Although he never taught me how to do things. He never taught me how to fill out forms and whatnot. He just told me how to be a person, how to be honest, how to be trustworthy. So I learned that from him, and it's carried me in good stead all these years. In the Japanese American community, as Diane might know, we have a place called Benkyo-do, which is the coffee shop in Manjuya. And it's said that if you do something wrong, the people at Benkyo-do know, and it's the Benkyo-do grapevine. So you can't do anything wrong in the community because everybody will know very soon.
That's for sure. And I think many communities have that same kind of grapevine going, right? Yeah. My mom used to always tell me, oh, people will know. So that was enough of a deterrent for sure. Turning to something a little more serious, as a man of integrity, as a man who holds these values very dear, you have been a real advocate in ways that people don't even or aren't aware of in terms of discrimination, and especially in your area, housing and real estate. You faced some of that yourself. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that for us?
Yeah, as I said, I was first licensed in 1964, which was just 20 years after World War II. So there are a lot of veterans that are returning. There are a lot of families that lost their sons, daughters, injured. So when I started in real estate, I faced a lot of discrimination, but it was more of a subtle type of discrimination. They didn't have any burning crosses on my lawn. But when I would go show a house, they would tell me that the property, oh, I'm sorry, but it's been sold. Or if I wanted to rent a place, they say, well, I'm sorry, we just rented it. Or if I submitted an offer, they wouldn't respond to me. So, as a young person, I just went to the next one. I didn't realize maybe I was too naive to think that they were discriminating against me. But I just, as my father told me, go on to the next one, work hard, and you'll make a living. So I continued to do that.
And you had received help from another ethnic group in your business.
Well, I founded the Asian Real Estate Association of America, which started only 18 years ago. Our mission statement was to serve the underserved Asian community. Now, a lot of people think that the Asian community is the model minority, but that's truly a myth because there are so many Asians that live at or close to the poverty line. There's a lot of people a lot of ethnicities and Southeast Asians that can't get housing. There's a lot of discrimination against them. So we formed the organizations to serve that community. And in 18 years, we've grown to 17,000 members and 42 chapters across the United States and 2 in Canada. It's been told that we are the largest Asian membership organization in the United States. Now, that just goes to show you the need that we have in the United States to fight discrimination and to help the Asian communities in need.
Alan, I've had an opportunity to witness some of the work that you've done with Aria and with Jim Park and the organization. And you're right, it's an organization that is doing really important work in creating a voice for Asian American professionals, but also your leadership in organizations like the California Association and the National Association, that you haven't just been there as a professional organization, but you've been there to really make a difference and to lead around issues of equity and fair housing, and to be sure that Asian Americans have a voice at the table. So tell us a little bit about some of the impact that some of those organizations are having, and how this voice that you've brought as an advocate is really kind of helping to move the needle.
Well, as I said, I was elected to be president of the San Francisco Association of Realtors in 1990. in my year as president-elect, I reviewed the roster of the leadership, the committee chairs, the board of directors, and even members of the association. They had about 2,000 members at the time, and there were no Asians in those positions and very few members. So I took it as my mandate to increase the membership, increase the participation in the association, and even bring them into leadership positions. So at the San Francisco Association, I started the Asian Council, which invited Asian agents and brokers to join. And we made it a friendly place where they would be looked down upon. And from there, we, over the years, cultivated 5 presidents of the association, which I'm very proud of. So that's just part of the work that I've done. I'm not saying that I'm any hero or anything, but I'm very proud of that accomplishment.
Yeah, you've broken down some really significant barriers in a profession that was very closed, even just, with your father's generation.
Yeah, that's for sure. The
even outside of the Asian clientele, tell us a little bit about some of the work that you and the associations that you're affiliated with have done in terms of leveling the playing field for women and gays and people with disabilities.
Well, I was just going to mention that the Civil Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act of 1964 and 1968 protected, you couldn't discriminate against race, religion, national origin, and they've added female, and now they're discussing about gender equality, sexual orientation. So that's very important because one of the hidden issues that we have in the Asian community are the gay Asians, and they are tremendously discriminated against, not only in housing, but just in society in general. So we're striving to help that segment of the Asian community also.
Well, one of the items that I wanted to be sure you talk about is some of the advocacy work that you've done in Washington, D.C. of bringing voice to some of these issues. Very oftentimes, we have a lot of Asian Americans who have served in elective office and in like Norm Mineta and Senator Inoue, for instance. But there are many people like you, Ellen, that are walking the halls of Congress and the state capitals, trying to educate and inform our elected officials about these issues. And I think, ARIA has been at the forefront of some of that work. I'd love to have you talk a little bit about that role of getting connected with elected officials and staying connected to be sure that they understand some of these issues.
Well, when we first started ARIA, we would visit our legislators in Washington, and we'd have to spend 15 minutes talking to a staff person as to who the heck ARIA was. They didn't know who we were. But over the years, we've established this reputation. And of course, we have 17,000 members and a lot of voters. So now the legislators and their staff people all recognize us. So when we call, they will immediately recognize us, and we're able to get an audience. One of the things that we did in Washington, D.C. is the No Other campaign. In the census, the Asian American Pacific Islanders were considered other. We didn't have our own category. So we fought to get the Asian Pacific Islander category in the census so that we would become recognized. And Norm Mineta and others helped us with that legislation. So we got that passed. We're very proud of that accomplishment.
Yeah, and since we're talking about ARIA, I want to be sure that you also touch on some of the philanthropic work that ARIA has done over the years, because it's not just a professional real estate affinity group. It is so much more than that, in that you've been really responsive to some really critical need.
Right. Several years ago, we formed the ARIA Foundation, which was to help Asian communities in need from natural disasters. And the first effort that we had was the Great Eastern Earthquake in Japan. As you know, the earthquake and tsunami devastated hundreds of thousands of people, and 20,000 lives lost and businesses damaged, and it's just total devastation. So we raised $650,000, to help with the recovery effort. Now, they needed billions of dollars, and $650,000 doesn't seem like a lot, but we helped build 12 homes in Ishinomaki City in Miyagi Prefecture. We've also donated money to an orphanage in Sendai. We helped raise money to plant pine trees in Rikuzen Takata. So we've done a lot of good. And not only that, we've helped donate money to the victims of the Sandy hurricane or tornado in northeast New York. We've helped the Filipino victims of Haiyan. We've helped people in the California with the wildfires. And recently we've donated money to help the victims of the terrible freeze in Texas. So the ARIA Foundation has done tremendous work to help Asian communities in need.
And this is a Pan-Asian group also. It is, although there are certainly Japanese Americans represented, it is primarily comprised of Chinese. What is the membership looking like? Chinese, Korean, Filipino?
Right. We have a lot of Indian, East Indian, and I found that we have a lot of Cambodians. We have Hmong and a lot of Vietnamese. The Vietnamese now are getting to be a large portion of our membership. I think percentage-wise, unfortunately, the Japanese are amongst the lowest, but some of us are very active.
Mm-hmm. Or some of you are very influential, I would say. I mean, I don't think that the organization came up on its own to help out the survivors in Tohoku. So I'm sure you had a heavy hand in that, Alan. You know, let's turn a little more locally. Gosh, you're kind of Mr. Japantown. You know, I don't know whether or not you know that that's your unofficial title, but many of us see that. If there is a big activity, a big community event, we can be sure that you are involved or some way or another. You know, I can name the Sister City Association with Osaka, the Cherry Blossom Festival in Northern California. Cherry Blossom, I think, was one of your first big community events. Can you tell us a little bit about your history with that project?
Yeah, I go way back with the Cherry Blossom Festival. The very first festival was in 1968, and I was a volunteer actually with the Queen program. I was in charge of getting the chaperones for the participants, the Queen participants. And so I've been active with the committee over the years ever since. And I chaired the Cherry Blossom Festival for, I've lost count, I think it's been 9 or 10 years. So my commitment with the Cherry Blossom Festival is really important to me. I think of the institutions in the community, the churches, the language schools and whatnot, the Cherry Blossom Festival is really important because we have the tea ceremony, we have the calligraphy, we have the flower arranging, we have the Japanese dance. We try to maintain as much culture, the Japanese culture and the Japanese American culture as possible. So it is very important.
But it's not all just culture. I mean, it's a little bit of fun too. Sumo is very, as we know, is a very important part of Japanese culture. And we have this wonderful photo. Tell us about this photo, Alan.
That's Musashi Maru. He was a Yokozuna in Japan. And we were fortunate to have him come to San Francisco to become the parade grand marshal for the Cherry Blossom Festival Grand Parade. I think he was 560 pounds, 6'4". And when he came to San Francisco, we had to hire a special van so that he could get into the van. And every venue we went to, I had to make sure that the shower doors were big enough, the bed was strong enough. We even had to buy a special sofa so that he could sit on, so that he wouldn't crush the furniture. So that was a lot of fun. The sumo was a big hit.
So it's really easy to say, oh yeah, I helped with the Cherry Blossom Festival. I headed it. What exactly does that involve? And talk to us also, since this is about Japan as well, talk to us about the interaction with people from Japan as part of your responsibilities with the Cherry Blossom pageant or the festival.
Sure. As a big part of the festival is to invite our participants from Japan, the taiko drummers, the Japanese dancers, the martial artists, We even bring in tea ceremony experts and sake experts to come to San Francisco. And over the years, they've been a tremendous part of the U.S.-Japan relationship. Without them, I think we would lose some of the Japanese flavor of the, really it's a Japanese-American festival. So I'm glad that the Japanese nationals participate.
You've also headed up the San Francisco-Osaka sister city relationship for some time now. What got you involved in that? And tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, there was a gentleman by the name of Sandy Calhoun who was the president of the association many, many years ago. He was a very, very nice gentleman who was bilingual. I had good relations with Japan. And one day he came up to me and asked me, he was going to retire and he wanted me to take over as president of the association. I was very hesitant at the time because I didn't really travel to Japan that much 30 years ago. But due to the relationship with Osaka, I've been to Japan, I believe, 25 times over the last 30 years, which is quite a bit, I think. I wish that I could go this year, but because of the pandemic, I haven't been able to travel. But one of the first trips I'm going to take is to Japan and visit all my friends in Osaka.
What's the importance of those relationships? I mean, you're one of the reasons why we wanted to have this discussion with you so much is that many of the other interviewees that we've talked with established their careers and their reputation on business success in their careers. You, Alan, yes, of course, business and your family's real estate, but you are such a grassroots guy. You know, you have come up and you own San Francisco. You've made San Francisco a player in so much of the part of the U.S.-Japan relationship. Tell us what spurs you to do that.
Well, you know, my interest in Japan and the Japanese Americans, believe it or not, started way back during the Vietnam War. There was this one general that said, a gook is a gook. He didn't differentiate between any Asian ethnicity. So I looked in the mirror and I said, wait a minute, I could be that gook. So I took it upon myself to make relationship between the United States, and my only opportunity was Japan. I couldn't go to Vietnam and whatnot. So I thought that it was very important to establish relationships with Japan. And when I got the opportunity to join the U.S.-Japan Council, I immediately jumped at it because it just followed along with all what I wanted to accomplish and what the USJC wanted to accomplish. So it was maybe not a match made in heaven, but it really fulfilled my wishes.
How'd you get involved with the U.S.-Japan Council?
Well, I knew Irene Hirano, for many, many years when she was the executive director of the Japanese American Museum in Los Angeles. She used to visit San Francisco on many fundraising trips. And we, at the Community Center, Japanese Culture and Community Center, we used to host her for a lot of our fundraisers, and I got to know her. And I was totally amazed at what an incredible person she was. She was smart, intelligent, driven, articulate. She got money out of me, so that's pretty good. But later on, Kaz Maniwa, who is vice president, I believe, with the U.S.-Japan Council, asked me if I would be interested in joining the board. And fortunately, I was approved and joined the board. And it was one of the best experiences of my life. The people that I met, the incredible Japanese Americans across the country, the judges, the lawyers, the volunteers, were just amazing. And it opened up a whole new world for me. I never realized that Japanese Americans were so great in the United States. So I'll always cherish my memories with the USJC.
You know, when we talked earlier, you talked about being very community minded and not having the opportunity to explore Japan in the way that you had wanted or in the way that you had in recent years. And you said that it was Paul Saki and Diane Matsuda at the Japanese Cultural Community Center, Northern California, who first sort of inspired you, and how this Shinzen Goodwill basketball program played a role in that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think the first experience, well, I visited Japan as a tourist when I was younger, but the Japanese Culture and Community Center with Paul Saki and Diane Matsuda established the ambassador tour, I believe, in 1997. And they brought 120 San Franciscans, firefighters, policemen, teachers, business people to Japan, to Osaka. And we had a wonderful program there. And that really impressed me a lot. And later, I found out that, and as I said, I'm really interested in basketball. And while I was in Los Angeles at a tournament, I met some folks that were organizing the Yonsei basketball program in Los Angeles. So I asked them if I could get some material from them. And then I brought that material to Paolo Saki, and he thought it was a good idea. He involved the Japanese consulate. And that was at a time when there was a lot of Japan bashing in the United States. So we thought it would be a good program to establish relationships with the US and Japan. And the Shinzen Goodwill basketball program was started. And over the years, it's been a tremendous success. It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of money, a lot of fundraising. And I believe that Diane, did your two daughters participate? Or, yeah. So you know how hard it is on the parents to fundraise and give the time to the Shinzen program, but it has been absolutely tremendous.
Well, that's another example, hearing about Yonsei involvement of legacy, of the legacy of connecting with community and of so many of the deeds and the practices that your parents started many years ago. So you were honored just a few years ago and recognized for some of the really great work, the groundbreaking work that you've achieved over the years in your involvement. And you were honored with the Order of the Rising Sun, Gold and Silver Rays. And we have a photo here of that event. And as you reflect, especially in light of this conversation we're having, as you reflect on this conversation we're having about parents and about some of the legacy that we carry from our parents, what was going through your mind at that time? And what are you thinking about now as you reflect back?
Well, never would I ever guess that I would receive the award from the Emperor and from Japan, the Order of the Rising Sun. That was one of the absolute highlights of my life. I look back upon it, I still can't believe it. But as you said, I bet you my parents are sort of amazed that I got to that position. They're probably looking down upon me and saying, I wonder how Alan got there. He was such a bad kid when he was young. But I am so honored that I received that. And to join the ranks of some of the previous awardees is just unbelievable. I still can't believe it.
Well, as you reflect also, I'm sure that there are some lessons that you've taken away. And I know that you speak to young people a lot. You have influence with a lot of young professionals and people that are in your circle and your network. What are some of those lessons and those tips and values that you share with them?
Well, Deborah, everybody is young to me. But I try to instill upon my kids, and indirectly, I try not to lecture people, obviously, but I try to lead by example as opposed to lecture. As I said, my father instilled upon me the respect and trust and honesty are the most important things, because without that, you don't have a career, you don't have a social life. So I try to emulate my father, and hopefully that it rubs off on the people that I work with in the Cherry Blossom Committee, the Osaka Sister City, and the Community Center, and all of my relationships with ARIA and other organizations. if I try to be the best person I can be, then hopefully it'll teach them.
All right, but I know that a lot of people are listening to this, and also part of the reason why we're doing this legacy series is to try to use your experience and what you've learned over the years and impart some wisdom to younger people or people trying to break into a profession. So what kind of advice? Okay, so this is not unsolicited advice now, Alan. We're soliciting advice. What kind of advice would you give people about either succeeding in life or about tips that you've learned over the years?
Wow, that is really a hard question. I don't want to repeat what I just said about being honest and trustworthy and have respect, but those are the things that I really feel are important. I never get before a group and tell people I'm not a motivational speaker. So I just try to live my life in the way I think I should be and have respect for everybody and treat everybody honestly. So that's probably the only advice that I can give.
One of the
Has that
things you
changed
shared
over
with
the
us.
years?
I'm sorry?
Has that changed over the years? I mean, like, being, I'm not that much younger than you, actually,
Yes,
and we
you
both
are.
know,
You are.
and we both know this. But I find that with time, my position has softened on things, or that I wasn't always the person I wanted to be. Did you have that sort of evolutionary process, or were you like so value driven from a very young age?
Well, I think when you're in sales, you are driven. You have to be driven in order to be a success. And, you might have made some mistakes. You might have stepped on some toes. You might have made some enemies. But at this stage of my life, I don't want to have enemies. I don't want to have any bad feelings. I don't want to have any hatred in my heart. That may sound a little corny. And I don't go around holding hands and singing Kumbaya with everybody. But I don't want to have this feeling that I dislike people because of something ridiculous that transpired in the past. I won't admire the Nazis in Germany. I won't admire a lot of the political leaders that we have, but I won't hate them. I just want to go on to the next and live my life in peace.
Those are really wise words, Alan. And it's going to take somebody with a modicum of maturity to be able to understand that. Let's go back a minute to USJC, because I think you and I share some of the same feelings. I was like you, born and raised in San Francisco, and that is very much my community. You talked a little bit about how awestruck you were to meet all these people from around the country who were Japanese Americans and were so accomplished. Tell us a little bit more about that and how that's opened up a whole new world for you in ways that you hadn't anticipated.
Well, especially with the U.S.-Japan Council, I've met, as I said, so many remarkable people. I mean, I've sat next to Danny Noe and had lunch. I've sat next to Norman Mineta and interviewed him. I've met some other senators. I've had a chance to talk with Ted Lieu and a lot of other legislators, attorneys across the country. Irene Hirano, for sure. I never would have had that experience without the U.S.-Japan Council. It really has broadened my horizons and really made me proud to be a Japanese American, believe me.
Alan, when you think about the promise of USJC having just celebrated, I guess it's 10 years, going into 11 years now, you were involved almost from the beginning. What do you think that the promise of USJC is into the future as the organization looks to the future?
Well, to be honest with you, when Danny Noe passed away, and then unfortunately recently Irene Hirano passed away, I thought that the future of the council might be dim. But because of the tremendous leadership that they've established with Suzanne Basala and all the presidents that we've had over the years, I can't name all of them, but establishing the leadership And at the last meeting that we had in person, there were panels of younger kids. I say younger kids, they're 30, 40 years old, but they are really impressive. They're well-spoken, intelligent, driven. So I know that the U.S.-Japan Council is really in good hands, and it does have a bright future. And unfortunately, the U.S.-Japan relationship has to be nurtured. And I think that the U.S.-Japan Council is one of those organizations that will further the cause of bettering the relationship between the United States and Japan.
It's ironic that you
go, Diane.
I was going to say it's ironic that you talk about the younger future and the next generation. You know, in our community, your son and your daughter are starting to become pillars of the community. Talk to us a little bit about the importance of family to you. Obviously, that the values you learn from your own parents, you're passing down to your son and your daughter. You're very close to your family. Can you share with us a little bit about that secret sauce that makes the Okamotos so special?
Well, I don't know if there's any secret, but I tell you, I'm so proud of my kids. My daughter is a realtor in San Francisco working in my office, and she's very successful. It's almost like she was born to become a realtor. She's driven, she's friendly, she's got a great personality. So I think she'll be a tremendous asset to the community. My son is a member of the board of the Japanese Culture and Community Center. As a matter of fact, I think he's serving as the vice president of the organization. He's also getting active with the San Francisco Association of Realtors as he's a real estate attorney. So I think I'm really proud of my two kids, as you are, Diane, of Hillary and the other daughter. I'm sorry, I can't remember her name now. That's terrible.
But, that's a sign of old age, Alan.
Lindsay. Lindsay and Hillary are great.
You said Okage-sama de, and I think there's so much of that in the way that so many of us were raised, right? Not only our Nisei parents, but our Issei grandparents, and so much sacrifice that they had to make so that we can enjoy the relative privilege that we have today. Did you get a chance to know your grandparents very much? I mean, I should have asked this question earlier, but it never occurred to me.
Unfortunately, my mother's parents, I didn't get to know the father, but the grandmother, she was a domestic, and she was a very hardworking lady, but she didn't speak too much English. So I really didn't get to know her well since I was a young kid, and I didn't really relate to her that much. My father's parents, his father was a shoemaker, owned a shoe shop. And he came to the United States in the late 1890s, excuse me. And he opened up a shoe shop, and it was an incredible shoe shop. With, I wish I sent you the picture of it, but he was very successful. And his mother, my father's mother, told me that they stood on Dolores Park watching the city burn during the 1906 earthquake. So my grandmother spoke a little bit of English, so I got to know her well. But my grandfather didn't speak English very well, so I really didn't relate to him too much.
Now there's another generation of Okamatos coming up, and I see you and Pat going everywhere with your granddaughters now. Tell us about this new generation of Okamatos.
Well, I tell you, being a parent is one of the greatest things in the world, as you know. But being a grandparent is the best thing in the world. I mean, you could spoil them. You don't have to worry about discipline. You don't have to worry about tuitions. You could just love them, and they love you back, and it's wonderful.
But you know what I see that's really interesting in your case is that your son and daughter-in-law are making a real effort for the girls to feel a part of the Japanese American community, you know, and so now they're fifth generation, fourth generation. What kind of effort goes into that, and how do you and Pat help support that?
Well, we try to involve them with the Japanese culture and the community center as much as possible with the Halloween parties and the Oshogatsu festivals and whatnot, and we bring them to the cherry blossom festivals all the time. And with the Buddhist church, we bring them to the Obonodori. It's difficult because they live in Oakland, and my daughter-in-law is Caucasian. So she doesn't have the knowledge of the Japanese American community. So it's an education for her also. But I think the secret is through food. She loves Japanese food. So with that, we can entice her to join the community more.
Ellen, I love the stories that you share about leading by example, because I think so many of what we know and what we practice as adults is what we've learned from our parents. And, you know, as a mother of two sons myself, I'm always looking for ways to connect them with our community. And I think that, you know, for many people who are watching this interview today, that's something that we're all working really hard to do, especially as, you know, we have, you know, fourth and fifth generation children and grandchildren. So you've laid a really important and instructional pathway in how you've chosen to be involved in the community. I'd like to kind of close our conversation here with talking a bit more about USJC. I know that you've dedicated a lot of your time also in cultivating relationships in Japan through the Sister City Association, through your local council general. But that's a really important role of building bridges with friends in Japan. And we have a photo here of a meeting that you, I guess, had with Taro Kono. Talk to us about that relationship, and that it's a very special relationship, certainly, because he has been such a champion of Japanese Americans. So talk to us about that relationship with Taro Kono.
You know, of all the Japanese politicians, I was the most impressed with Mr. Kono. I think, Diane, you and I were part of a dinner that we had with him at Fisherman's Wharf many, many years ago. And I was so impressed with his English and his knowledge of the United States. Then over the years, he became foreign minister. And now I understand that he's even a potential prime minister of Japan. I think because he was educated partially in the United States, he really understands how Americans think. And that is so important because Japanese and Americans are so different in how they approach issues. So my meeting with Taro Kono was really important, and I hope that one day he does become prime minister.
Yeah, he has truly been committed. I know that when he comes through the West Coast, he makes a special point also to come to Los Angeles and meet with Japanese Americans. He has many valuable, treasured relationships there as well. So I'd like you to close with some reflections on Irene. I know that you had a very special relationship with Irene through many years. And as you think about her gifts and her legacy that she's left, what are your final thoughts on Irene?
Well, I tell you, Irene, as I mentioned earlier, she is one of the most remarkable persons that I've ever met. She accomplished so much with the museum, the Japanese American National Museum, and with the U.S.-Japan Council. There's a possibility that the council may not have been the success that it is now without her. She was so busy. She traveled so much. And even during her illness, she traveled. I know that I joke about where her house is. She used to live on 1A, which refers to the seat on the airplane. She was just an absolutely remarkable lady. And as they say, they broke the mold when they created her.
Well, thank you, Ellen. That's a really nice way to wrap. Thank you so much for your time today and also for sharing your story. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Believe me, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much to both of you. You are great.
Thank you. So we also want to thank all of you who are joining us and tuning in today. Thank you very much for your support of the U.S.-Japan Council and for programs like this that enables us to continue on. We hope you enjoyed today's dialogue. Please check out other interviews in this series that are available on USJC's website and also on YouTube.